Oh my God, you clumsy fool. This is exactly why your kind doesn't belong here. The words echoed against the crystal dome ceiling, ricocheted off the cold marble columns, and crashed down like a hammer blow to a woman's chest. The grand hall erupted, not with applause, but with cruel, poisonous laughter. Naomi Carter, in an elegant white gown, lay on the freezing marble floor, a dark stain of Bordeaux wine spreading like an open wound. Around her, faces polished with power and diamonds leaned down, eyes glimmering like predators on the hunt. Phones gleamed in the air, lifted like steel hawks, ready to devour every humiliating second. Margaret Whitmore, with silver hair sculpted like a crown and diamond earrings glittering like ice, spat out her words like venom, tipped arrows. You are nothing. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as decent people here. Security. Get her out immediately. The room buzzed with malicious whispers. People like her are always trouble. Who even let this thing in here? A laugh rang out. Preston Whitmore, 28, his $10,000 tuxedo undone by liquor, raised his glass and sneered. Did someone call housekeeping? I think the floor just hired a new maid. His entourage roared, glasses clinking like a cheering crowd at some grotesque performance. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Inside her, a silent roar rose. Not fear, not shame, but something colder, sharper, dangerously still. Slowly, she pressed her hands against the floor and stood. Her heels struck the marble with each step. Clack, 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 like a funeral drumbeat. The laughter wavered. Eyes flickered with unease. Light from the chandelier glimmered across Naomi's face, her dark eyes fathomless and cold as the midnight ocean. They held no anger, no tears, only calculation. She stood like a storm that had reached shore, and the hall was a city unprepared for the flood. Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice, but every syllable was sharpened enough for the whole room to hear. You are a stain, and you will never be anything but what you are right now, a lowly disaster who dared to soil my floor. Naomi adjusted the stained fabric of her gown, a simple motion, yet it radiated an undeniable aura, the presence of someone who would never bow. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on every face. The ones who laughed, the ones who filmed, the ones pretending pity. To them, she was nothing but an intruder, tonight's entertainment. They had no idea that the woman standing there could shift entire markets with a single signature. No idea that they themselves had just written the first line of their own family's downfall. Naomi pulled her phone from her clutch. The screen lit up, casting a cold glow across her still eyes. Her fingers moved swiftly, efficiently, like a lawyer preparing a termination clause, like a CEO signing an order to liquidate. The room fell silent. Do you hear it? The sound of wine dripping from her gown onto marble, each drop like a tolling bell of doom. Naomi raised her head, her voice calm yet sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. You have just made the most expensive mistake of your lives. The words landed soft as a breeze, yet thundered like a verdict. No one in that hall knew that the price would not be measured in money alone. It would be the Whitmore family's past, present, and future. Naomi Carter rose to her feet, her dark eyes glinting with a cold light. The grandeur of the ballroom suddenly seemed to shrink. From the lingering chime of crystal glasses to the shuffle of shoes across marble floors, everything was swallowed into a silence, strung tight as a violin string. No one in the room would admit it, but they all felt it. Something had shifted. Drops of Bordeaux wine continued to fall onto the marble, drip, 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 like the pounding heartbeat of the entire hall. Margaret Whitmore still had not sensed the danger. She stepped forward, her high heels striking sharply against the floor. Her voice was low but razor-edged, carrying to every corner. "You are pathetic. You will never be anything more than a stain on this perfect evening." Naomi did not respond immediately. She smoothed the soaked fabric of her gown, each gesture slow and deliberate, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the cold force of restraint. She looked around, faces everywhere, some still sneering, eyes dripping with contempt, some holding up phones, waiting for a viral clip, some feigning pity, but with lips curved ever so slightly, savoring the humiliation of an outsider. In their minds, Naomi was just a woman of color publicly disgraced, a diversion, an accident at $1 million gala. They did not know the truth. The smooth jazz from the small orchestra in the corner still played, but now it sounded suffocating. It no longer felt like music for a party, but the score of an impending execution. Naomi lifted her phone, the screen glowing bright. For a moment, the cold blue light across her face made the entire ballroom feel drenched in steel. Her fingers moved swiftly, precise and practiced, like a lawyer drafting a termination clause, like a CEO authorizing liquidation. Preston Whitmore broke into a dry, mocking laugh. "Who are you calling? A labor lawyer? Or maybe a dry cleaner?" His entourage roared, slapping their glasses, treating the insult as a performance. Naomi raised her head and spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, steady, not loud, not hurried, yet it carried farther and sharper than any laugh. "You think you've just witnessed an accident. But in truth, this is only the opening statement of an indictment." The words sliced the air in two. Those laughing froze. Eyes flickered, unsettled. The hall chilled. Guests no longer knew if they were watching entertainment or the beginning of disaster. In Naomi's mind, a memory flashed. Her grandmother's calloused hands after 3 shifts a day, scrubbing floors for wealthy families. Her aging but fierce eyes saying, "Never let anyone set your worth. One day, you will be the one setting theirs." Naomi's breath steadied. She was no victim. She was the one holding the scales. The hall quieted, broken only by the drip of wine. Margaret frowned, baffled at why the evening's revelry had gone hollow. A guest near the front whispered, "She isn't like others humiliated here. She isn't trembling. She's watching us." Another murmured, "That look, it's like she's scoring us, as if we're the ones on trial." The whispers spread like a cold draft through the ballroom. Naomi walked toward the bar. The bartender hesitated, glancing at Margaret for instruction. Margaret flicked her hand, voice sharp. Don't serve her. She doesn't deserve to drink with us." Scattered laughter followed. Naomi only smiled faintly. She leaned against the bar, eyes narrowing slightly, and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Interesting. A room full of people who claim to know the rules, but seem to have forgotten Section 201 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Murmurs erupted. Some older guests stiffened. Preston scowled. "What kind of trash law is that?" Naomi turned her phone, the screen glowing with a drafted email. "Federal law. It prohibits discrimination in public accommodations, including restaurants, hotels, and of course, galas." Silence dropped like a curtain. This time, no one laughed. The orchestra stopped playing. The metallic clang of a glass hitting a table rang like the opening gun of a trial. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Naomi turned, walking slowly to the center of the hall. Each heel strike against marble echoed like a funeral drum. "Who do you think I am?" she asked, her voice calm yet resonant enough to fill the space. No one answered. They didn't know, and that unknowing itself spread fear. She stopped in the middle, the chandelier light pouring down, wrapping her like a queen's crown. Her gaze locked onto Margaret, then Preston, then every guest in sight. Do not laugh too quickly, because sometimes a joke can turn into the verdict that condemns an entire dynasty. The words fell like a judge's gavel sealing a coffin. In that hall glittering with diamonds and gowns, Naomi Carter, the woman dismissed as nothing, had planted the seed of a storm that would strip away every smile, every dollar, every name carved onto a golden plaque. And the audience, the powerful guests, began to shiver. They did not yet know the truth, but they could feel it drawing near. The air in the ballroom thickened. The whispers faded into a tense silence. Every eye turned toward the woman who had dared to quote federal law in front of the elite Naomi Carter. Margaret Whitmore still clung to arrogance. She crossed her arms, her voice sharp as a blade. "Law? Do not think a few lines from a book make you somebody. In here, the only law is the law of money." Naomi's smile was faint, almost amused. "Money? How coincidental. That just happens to be the language I speak most fluently." The words cracked the polished facade of the Whitmore family. A few seasoned guests instantly recognized it. This woman was no pauper. Naomi's smile was not the smile of someone humiliated. It was the smile of someone holding the knife. If anyone in that room had bothered to know, they would have realized Naomi Carter was not a stranger who slipped in spilled wine. At 48, she was the ghost in the machine of American capitalism. They called her the Phantom Chairwoman, a business titan so powerful that few had ever seen her in person. 25 years ago, in a crumbling Detroit apartment, Naomi started with a daring idea: to link clean energy technology with sustainable real estate. No capital, no patron, only intellect and iron will. From a tiny office, she built Carter Global Holdings, a $62 billion conglomerate with controlling stakes in multiple Fortune 500 companies. She oversaw more than 250,000 employees worldwide and owned towers across New York, Chicago, and London. Yet Naomi chose anonymity. She let lawyers negotiate, let spokespersons face the press, because she knew true power never needed to parade itself, and through it all, she never forgot her grandmother's words. You must rise to prove to every hand, once dismissed as worthless, that dignity is the only eternal asset. The Whitmores, by contrast, were a dynasty rotting beneath the gilded surface. Edward Whitmore, 65, heir to a real estate empire, had squandered it with reckless stock gambles and frivolous investments. Debt piled high, hidden only by the hope of one last deal to save them. Margaret, 61, lived wrapped in glittering illusion, hosting galas and charity boards, not from compassion, but from fear that without the title Mrs. Whitmore, she was nothing. Their son Preston, 29, was a disaster in a tuxedo, never having worked a day, drunk on entitlement. His only skills were squandering money and mocking the vulnerable. Their daughter Isabel, 27, beautiful and ruthless, wielded cruelty as art. To her, every cutting remark was a performance piece for a crowd eager to applaud. What they did not know, everything they had, company, fortune, reputation, mansion, rested on one deal. A $2.5 billion merger awaiting one signature. The signature of Naomi Carter. Naomi scanned the ballroom, her gaze slicing through every face, every phone held up to record. If you think this is entertainment, enjoy it. Because very soon you will all be witnesses to one of the most spectacular downfalls in history. Edward still did not understand. He sneered, straining to keep his composure. Listen, Miss Carter, or whatever your name is, you are nothing in this room. Do not think quoting laws makes you a threat to the Whitmores. Naomi arched an eyebrow, her smile sharp. Oh? So you do not realize whose money you are borrowing? The words made several guests stiffen. A seasoned businessman whispered, face pale. Impossible. Could she be Carter? Murmurs rippled instantly. Eyes that once mocked now flickered with unease. Margaret snapped, her voice desperate. Do not be fooled. Someone like her cannot possibly be. Naomi cut her off, her voice steel. Cannot possibly be the owner of Carter Global. Cannot possibly be the one person with the power to save your crumbling empire. The ballroom erupted. Phones once raised to mock now trembled, as their owners realized they were recording the public suicide of a dynasty. Naomi lifted her phone. On the other end was David Chen, head of legal. His voice was crisp. Ms. Carter, the merger contract with Whitmore Enterprises is prepared. Shall I proceed with signing tonight? The ballroom froze. Words like bombs detonated. Merger. Whitmore Enterprises. Sign tonight. Naomi answered clearly, so all could hear. No, David. Cancel everything. Cancel the merger. Cancel the subsidiaries. Cancel every line of credit extended. Effective immediately. Silence smothered the hall. Laughter evaporated into stone. Edward staggered, face ashen, choking out. No, impossible. Who are you? Naomi met his eyes, then calmly produced a black steel business card engraved in platinum. Naomi Carter, founder, chairwoman, and chief executive officer of Carter Global Holdings, valued at $62 billion. And I have just decided the Whitmores will no longer exist within my system. The card dropped into Edward's hand like a death sentence. The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering into 1,000 shards. The once boisterous hall now lay silent. Faces that mocked were pale. Phones slipped from hands, glasses abandoned. Everyone understood. They had just witnessed a dynasty sign its own death warrant, undone by arrogance and blindness. Naomi Carter was no longer the woman humiliated on the ballroom floor. She was the storm. And the Whitmores, no matter how rich, were nothing but castles of sand before the tide. The wineglass shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like an execution shot through the opulent ballroom. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The glittering crystal chandeliers above no longer seemed festive but surgical, cutting through the air and exposing every contour of horror on the Whitmores' faces. Edward trembled, his hand clutching the black steel card so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes fixed on the platinum-engraved name, Naomi Carter, as if it were the indictment of his entire life. Margaret, still refusing to accept reality, shrieked in a voice shrill and desperate. "Impossible! This is a fraud! You cannot be Naomi Carter. Someone like you could never own an empire like that." Naomi turned her head, her gaze cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Someone like me? That is exactly the problem, Margaret. You never believed a woman of color could stand atop $62 billion. But today, the truth is your sentence." At that moment, the great doors opened. A group of over a dozen attorneys in impeccably tailored suits entered, their footsteps striking the marble like steel hammers. Leading them was Patricia Hall, a seasoned lawyer with eyes of iron. Her voice rang out with the clarity of a verdict. "By order of Chairwoman Naomi Carter, all cooperative agreements, including the two, and a $500 million merger with Whitmore Enterprises, are hereby cancelled with immediate effect." The ballroom reeled as if struck by lightning. Guests who had been watching the humiliation like a comedy whispered in awe, "My God, it's real." Patricia opened a leather case and read each clause with surgical precision. Clause 14.2. Contract termination in the event of severe violation of ethical business standards. Clause 19.6. All credit lines and working capital extended will be revoked immediately. Clause 22.1. Carter Global reserves the right to seize collateralized assets. Each clause fell like a nail hammered into the Whitmore family's coffin. Edward staggered, his face pale as paper, his voice cracking with feeble desperation. "Wait, we can negotiate. Naomi, think of the thousands of employees. Think of the Chicago legacy." Naomi cut him off, her tone calm yet merciless. "Edward, I have thought of my hundreds of thousands of employees, but you thought only of casinos and your rotting reputation. That so-called legacy of yours is nothing but a house of paper, and I do not invest in scraps." Margaret stumbled forward, her nails clawing into Naomi's arm like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. "You cannot destroy a century of honor over a misunderstanding." Naomi shook her off, her voice cutting like steel. "This is not a misunderstanding, Margaret. This is who you truly are when you thought I had no power. And now, that very power is your judgment." The guests began to stir uneasily. Those who had laughed now slipped into the shadows. A woman whispered to her husband, "God, your logistics firm is signing contracts with Carter Global." A politician discreetly pulled out his phone, typing frantic messages to advisors. Many scrambled to delete videos they had uploaded mocking Naomi, but it was already too late. The footage of her humiliation was spreading at the speed of light. In the corner, Preston shook uncontrollably, his phone slipping from his hand. The video he had gleefully filmed of Naomi's fall was now evidence condemning himself. Isabel, drained of all color, muttered under her breath, "No, it cannot be. It was all just a joke." But the cold clatter of keyboards from Carter Global's legal team drafting seizure orders proved that the joke was over. Naomi calmly drew out her phone, pressing a button. The screen lit up with the words, "Finance Division." She switched on the speaker, her voice steady for all to hear. "Transfer the entire $2.5 billion allocation from the Whitmore deal to the Grandma Rose Fund. Prioritize investment in startups led by women of color and minority communities in Chicago." The ballroom fell into a suffocating silence. Then the clear voice of confirmation rang out. "Understood, Madam Carter. The fund transfer will be completed within 24 hours. The crowd froze. Those who had once mocked her now stared in horror. Naomi had turned the humiliation they inflicted into an enforcement for an entire new generation, while the Whitmores were left with nothing. Edward collapsed into a chair, clutching his head, muttering in despair, "It's gone. It's all gone." Margaret's screams tore through the hall, but now they sounded no more regal than the cries of someone stripped of a throne. Preston sat crumpled on the floor, sobbing into his hands. Isabel trembled, her once flawless makeup running down her face like a melting mask. Naomi stood in the center of the hall, her figure straight as a blade. Her voice rang out, crisp and deliberate, each word etched into the air. "Today you have learned the most expensive lesson in corporate history. Dignity cannot be bought. But to insult dignity can cost you an empire." The ballroom was now a graveyard for a dynasty. The chandeliers still blazed, the red wine still glistened, but everyone knew the light only illuminated the public collapse of Chicago's most infamous family. Naomi turned and walked away, her heels striking the marble in steady rhythm, each step echoing like the drumbeat of an execution, and with every step she laid another shovel of earth upon the grave of Whitmore Enterprises. Naomi's heels struck the marble floor with unrelenting force, each step pounding like the cadence of a funeral march for the Whitmore dynasty. The heavy oak doors closed behind her, sealing in a ballroom that had transformed into a mausoleum for a fallen empire. Outside, the Chicago wind cut sharp and cold, but Naomi did not shiver. Her neatly tied hair remained regal, her white gown stained crimson still flowed with defiance, and her eyes blazed like torches. Flashbulbs exploded in rapid succession. Dozens of reporters who had been waiting outside the opulent venue surged forward, microphones and cameras raised high, streaming live across the world. Rumors spread faster than the winter wind. A guest publicly humiliated at the Whitmore Gala. But whispers were no longer needed. Everyone had heard Naomi speak her name with her own lips. Naomi Carter, chairwoman of Carter Global, net worth $62 billion. A young journalist broke through the crowd, shouting, "Madam Carter, is it true you just cancelled the $2.5 billion Whitmore deal right here at the event. Naomi stopped. The flashes reflected in her eyes as she spoke, slowly, firmly, each word cutting through the air. Yes. I do not do business with those who demean human dignity. A business contract can be rewritten, but self-respect cannot. That brief response, under a single minute, became the lead headline across every morning broadcast. Back inside the ballroom, the silence was suffocating, so thick that Edward's ragged breathing filled the void. He sat collapsed, clutching his head in trembling hands. Screens around him lit up with notifications. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. The clip of Naomi's humiliation had already surpassed 2 million views within 1 hour. Margaret, frantic, clutched at her husband and screamed hoarsely. "Edward! Do something! Call the lawyers! Call the board! We cannot lose everything like this!" But Edward did not answer. His eyes were fixed on a new email flashing on his phone. Immediate payment demand. Carter Global Credit Recall. Preston, pale as death, muttered under his breath as if confessing to himself. We were really bankrupt. Isabel slumped into a chair, her flawless makeup smeared into ruin, whispering, "They recorded me. The whole world has seen." Within hours, hashtags flooded Twitter. Whitmore, racism, hashed Carter Global, hashed cost of cruelty. Financial journalists released instant analyses. With the deal cancelled, Whitmore will lose over 70% of its liquidity within the next quarter. Carter Global controls critical debt positions, meaning Whitmore could collapse within 30 days. One financial news channel streamed live coverage with the caption, "A century-old Whitmore empire on the brink of collapse, all from a single night of arrogance." Online, fury poured through comments. "This isn't drama, this is justice. Respect must come before profit. Naomi Carter just taught the world that lesson." Seated in her quiet Maybach gliding down Michigan Avenue, Naomi read the headlines, scrolling across her tablet handed over by her assistant. Her face remained calm, but her eyes burned with pride tempered by sorrow. They thought they could trample me, just as they once trampled my grandmother who scrubbed floors in homes like this on her knees. But history is different now, she thought. Her assistant leaned in. "Madam Carter, global media outlets are calling for interviews. Do you want me to arrange them?" Naomi shook her head lightly. "No need. What I did tonight was the strongest answer I could give." The news spread across international trading floors. When the Chicago Exchange opened the next morning, Whitmore stock went into freefall, losing 42% of its value in just 30 minutes. Analysts declared it a financial suicide. Politicians once funded by the Whitmore Foundation rushed to sever ties. One congressman announced live on air, "There can be no place for racism in business. I stand with Mrs. Carter's decision." On Wall Street, investors whispered a new phrase, "The Whitmore effect, collapse born of arrogance." That night, the Whitmore mansion lay in silence, but it was not peace. It was decay. Edward sat at his desk, a mountain of debt documents before him. His hand shook as he signed foreclosure orders on the last of their assets. Each signature felt like a knife slashing through his bloodline. Margaret stood before her mirror, staring at the glittering jewels around her neck. One by one, she removed them, each diamond clinking into its case with the cold finality of chains. She whispered, "We've lost it all, everything." Preston drowned himself in liquor, his face blotched red, muttering, "It was just a joke, just a joke." Isabel, the once proud princess, lay curled on her bed as her phone lit up with thousands of hateful messages. She hurled it across the floor and wept into her hands. Why is all of this falling on us? Meanwhile, in the high-rise offices of Carter Global, Naomi Carter sat before the vast glass window, gazing down at the city shimmering with lights. Chicago glittered with wealth and grandeur, but she knew one signature, one decision, could redraw the entire map of power. She took a sip of wine and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." And it was true. The real game of power had only just begun. The next morning, Chicago awoke to a media earthquake. Every news channel, from finance to entertainment, opened with the same name, Naomi Carter. CNN's ticker read, "Billionaire CEO Naomi Carter cancels $2.5 billion deal. Whitmore Empire on the brink of bankruptcy." Meanwhile, the New York Times ran a stark headline. "The price of arrogance. The Whitmore dynasty lost everything in a single night." At exactly 10 a.m., inside the gleaming glass headquarters of Carter Global, Naomi stepped onto the press conference podium. Cameras followed her every move. There was no trace of the red wine stain from the night before. Today, she wore a sharp black suit and crisp white blouse, the very image of a textbook CEO, the embodiment of power. The room fell silent as Naomi began to speak. "Last night, I endured something no human being should ever have to endure. But instead of burying that humiliation, I chose to turn it into strength. Carter Global hereby declares the cancellation of all cooperation with Whitmore Enterprises." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the hundreds of journalists before her. And the $2.5 billion that had been allocated for that deal will instead be redirected to the Grandma Rose Fund, a fund dedicated to investing in Black founders, women, and minority communities right here in Chicago. We are not only cutting out the rot, we are planting seeds for the future. Applause erupted, thundering through the hall and lasting several minutes as camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Within hours, Naomi's message spread across the globe. Hashtags, #Grandma Rose Fund and #Naomi Carter. Justice dominated Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. A political commentator declared on live television, "This is no longer just about a deal. This is a revolution in how corporations treat people. Naomi Carter has turned justice into an economic standard." In Chicago, hundreds of young entrepreneurs, students, and immigrant communities gathered outside Carter Global's headquarters, holding banners high that read, "Thank you, Naomi." In stark contrast, the Whitmore mansion was shrouded in darkness. Phones rang relentlessly, not with offers of support, but with banks demanding repayment, lawyers pressing for settlements, and shareholders demanding answers. Edward sat motionless before his Bloomberg screen, watching Whitmore stock plummet to $12 a share, nearly 80% of its market value wiped out. Margaret entered, her face ashen. "Edward, they've frozen all our accounts. We have no money left to pay the staff this week." Edward roared, but his voice cracked and broke. "Don't say another word. It's all over." Preston, the once arrogant son, now slumped in a dimly lit bar as his phone buzzed non-stop. Those who once hovered around him for money now sent mocking texts. "Do you even have enough left to pay your bar tab?" He hurled his glass to the floor, liquor splashing across the tiles, but inside he was hollow. Isabel, the once proud princess, opened social media only to see her own face, that cruel smile as she tossed wine on Naomi, turned into a viral meme. Fashion brands severed contracts, friends abandoned her. In panic, she screamed through her tears, "How could one moment of cruelty destroy my entire life?" Margaret, the woman who once ruled charity galas, opened a cold email from 3 major organizations. "We are officially terminating all partnerships. Acts of racial discrimination are intolerable." The prestigious chairs that once served as her throne vanished in an instant. High above the city, in Carter Global's towering glass office, Naomi sat alone, gazing out at Chicago's horizon. Below, crowds roared her name. She closed her eyes and remembered the calloused hands of her grandmother, a woman who had bent her back, scrubbing floors in wealthy homes her whole life, yet had never been granted dignity. Naomi whispered softly, "Do you see, Grandma? I've turned humiliation into a legacy for generations to come." A single tear slipped down her cheek, not of pain, but of release. European newspapers called Naomi the $62 billion woman who put dignity above profit. In Africa, television stations praised her as a global black icon. Across Asia, young entrepreneurs circulated a new motto: "Respect is ROI. Respect is return on investment." The world was no longer just talking about Naomi Carter. The world was beginning to reflect on itself. While the Whitmore family sank deeper into chaos, Naomi took firm steps forward, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol of justice. One question echoed across every media outlet. If true wealth is not measured by how much money you have, but by how you use it to change the world, then who is the real billionaire? Naomi had answered through action, and from here, the game of justice had only just begun. Chicago had never witnessed a fall so swift and catastrophic. In just 7 days, the name Whitmore, once a symbol of power and opulence, had become a stain whispered about in every cafe, printed on every newspaper, and dissected in every corporate boardroom. Whitmore Enterprises' stock was officially delisted from the NYSE. Banks moved in to seize assets. Courts issued orders to freeze accounts. Each mansion, yacht, and private jet of the family was stamped with the cold red seal. Seized by court order. Edward Whitmore sat alone in his hollow office. The Van Gogh painting that once hung proudly behind him had already been stripped from the wall by the bank for auction. On his desk remained only a few scattered documents and one chilling letter from his attorney. "Mr. Edward, pursuant to Section 11 of federal bankruptcy law, we are officially filing to bring your case to court within 30 days. He threw the letter down and buried his head in his trembling hands. The man who once bellowed across the stock market now sat motionless like a condemned prisoner awaiting his sentence. In a rare whisper, he muttered, "All because of one night, one foolish night." Margaret Whitmore, once the woman whose presence at any gala commanded a standing ovation, now walked into the local supermarket with a plain, reusable bag. But instead of admiring glances, she received venomous whispers. "Isn't that Mrs. Whitmore, the one who screamed and called someone trash at that gala?" A group of middle-aged women deliberately blocked her path, sneering. "What? No maids left to shop for you?" Margaret clutched the basket handle tight, trying to maintain composure. But when laughter erupted behind her, tears streamed down her face right there at the checkout counter. The self-proclaimed queen had been reduced to an outcast scorned by society. Preston, the playboy who once burned through tens of thousands of dollars in elite clubs each night, now sat in a cramped rental on the outskirts of town. His phone buzzed endlessly with creditor threats. "Preston, you still owe 200 grand. Pay up or we'll come to find you." His hands shook, sweat pouring as he tried calling old friends for help. But no one answered, no one cared. The photo of him grinning during that gala, live-streaming Naomi's humiliation, had now become a viral meme captioned, "From champagne to shame." A brutal spiral from golden excess to rock-bottom disgrace. Isabel, once the darling muse of glossy fashion magazines, now found every luxury brand cutting ties. She attempted to audition for a small show, but the judges only exchanged cold looks before saying, "Sorry, we don't want the audience to boo the moment you appear." Returning to her rental, Isabel opened TikTok. The clip of her throwing wine at Naomi had surpassed 200 million views. The comments seethed with rage. "Arrogance in ruins. The face of failure." She buried her face in a pillow, screaming in despair. "I just wanted a little attention. How did it come to this?" It wasn't only the Whitmore family. Those who laughed along that night were now dragged into the spiral. Businesses that once proudly partnered with Edward scrambled to announce they had no association. Politicians who had once taken donations from the family rushed to erase every trace of photos together. A scholar declared on live television, "The Whitmore case will be taught in MBA programs worldwide as a costly lesson. Character is currency." While the Whitmores drowned in collapse, Naomi Carter soared higher than ever. In its very first week, the Grandma Rose Fund received over 1,200 applications from Black entrepreneurs and women founders. Naomi personally reviewed some of the projects, her eyes glowing with hope. "Every tear I shed that night," she thought, "will become seeds for the future of thousands of others." The Whitmore saga spread across the world like a modern Greek tragedy, from the heights of power to the depths of disgrace, from those who humiliated others to becoming a global punchline, from the untouchable dynasty to a case study in classrooms on moral decay. Naomi never had to shout, never needed violence. She used only two weapons, the law and the truth. In the once gilded mansion, now sealed by court order, Edward sat staring at the night sky, whispering a question with no answer. How could one moment of arrogance erase a century of reputation? The answer had already echoed across the world. Because they forgot one simple truth. Respect is the foundation of all power. 1 year after that disgraceful gala night, Chicago witnessed a spectacle it had never seen before, the auctioning of the entire Whitmore legacy. The gilded mansion on Gold Coast Avenue, once the site of the most extravagant parties in America, was now packed with journalists, photographers, and collectors, eager to claim a fragment of a fallen dynasty. The auctioneer's gavel fell coldly. Monet painting Orgul's Hoy, $4.8 million. Wine collection, $2.1 million. Margaret Whitmore's diamond jewelry set, $9.3 million. Each number rang out like a blade, cutting through the last remnants of illusion. Edward Whitmore, now 66, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. Every morning he put on a grey uniform with a small name tag. Edward, property manager. His job was to check elevators, log water meters, and respond to tenant complaints. One day, as a young family moved in, the husband, holding the keys Edward had just handed him, hesitantly asked, "Excuse me, are you really Edward Whitmore? From Whitmore Enterprises?" Edward forced a smile, his eyes lowering. "Yes, that's me. Or rather, it used to be." The man didn't know what to say, but for Edward, the question pierced like a knife. From a CEO signing billion-dollar deals to a man checking leaking pipes. At 63, Margaret Whitmore experienced her first standing shift job. She wore a black uniform, standing behind the counter of a clothing store, folding shirts, forcing a strained smile for customers who had once been her friends in high society. One day, 2 women walked past, recognizing her. They covered their mouths, whispering with cruel laughter. She used to chair charity galas. Now she folds shirts for strangers. Margaret's cheeks flushed, her hands trembled, the shirt crumpling in her grasp. But she said nothing. A sigh escaped, a quiet admission that her throne in society had been dismantled forever. Preston, now 31, worked night shifts at a tech company building. His tasks were scrubbing floors, emptying trash, cleaning toilets. The cruelest detail, the building was owned by Apex Stratos, and at the front entrance hung a massive plaque. Sponsored by Grandma Rose Fund, empowering minority entrepreneurs. Every time he passed it, Preston lowered his head. He knew too well that fund came from the very $2.5 billion his father had once begged Naomi Carter to use to save them. Instead, it became the lifeline. For thousands of others, while he wore rubber gloves to scrub urinals. A co-worker clapped him on the shoulder with a smirk. "Hey, weren't you the Whitmore rich kid once?" Preston gave no reply. To him, even the fluorescent lights seemed to blur and fade. At 29, Isabel worked as a barista in a crowded cafe. Each time a customer's drink was ready, she had to smile and call out loudly, "Caramel macchiato for Jason." A group of students whispered, pointing. Isn't that her? Wasn't she the one who threw wine at Naomi? Phones turned in her direction. Isabel pressed her lips tight, pretending not to hear. But just hours later, a video of her washing cups with the caption, "From $1 million heiress to 12-hour barista," racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Social media never forgets, and Isabel realized her arrogant past would forever dangle over her like a suspended sentence. Meanwhile, Naomi Carter shone brighter than ever. She appeared on the cover of Forbes, the headline bold, "The Woman Who Turned Humiliation into Justice." In its first year alone, the Grandma Rose Fund financed over 300 small businesses. Half were led by Black women, the rest by Latino, Asian, and other marginalized founders. At a press conference, Naomi stood before a packed hall, flashes erupting around her. Her voice was steady and powerful. "They thought I was nothing. But from that nothing, we created $2.5 billion of opportunity. That is the true value of economic justice." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. The name Whitmore was no longer invoked as a symbol of prosperity, but as a cautionary tale. In business schools, professors lectured on case studies. Whitmore Enterprises, the textbook example of failure when character does not match power. In contrast, Naomi Carter became the new standard. The press called her the phantom of justice in capitalism. Other CEOs, stepping into grand galas, whispered to each other, "Don't become the next Whitmore." One snowy night, Naomi stood by the window of Apex Tower, looking out over Chicago's dazzling lights. In her heart, the image of her grandmother lingered, the woman who had scrubbed floors on her knees to raise her. Naomi whispered, "Grandma, at last they understand. True power was never in olden ballrooms. It lies in the dignity that can never be sold." The city lights reflected in her eyes, the gleam of justice fulfilled. The story of the Whitmore collapse did not end within the borders of Chicago. It erupted into a global earthquake. Major newspapers, the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, all carried the same headline. From gala to catastrophe, $2.5 billion lost in one night of bigotry. The financial markets trembled. Shares of companies once partnered with Whitmore plummeted relentlessly. Investment funds scrambled to cut their losses. Analysts gave it a name, the Whitmore effect, meaning that a single moral scandal could reduce an entire empire to ashes. In a skyscraper investment bank in New York, traders stared at screens glowing red. A young analyst shouted, "Whitmore Real Estate just lost 47% of its value in only 3 days. The mortgage-backed loans are going to implode." A fund manager muttered with a trembling voice, "All of this because of one sentence. You are nothing." On Wall Street, a new clause began to appear in contracts, morality clause. It stipulated that any discriminatory act by corporate leaders could immediately nullify agreements, accompanied by massive penalties. One lawyer commented, "From now on, in economics, dignity carries financial value." In Washington, D.C., a special congressional committee convened. Lawmakers grilled the Secretary of Commerce. "Can we allow companies to receive federal support while violating basic human rights?" A new bill was born, the Fair Dignity Act, requiring major corporations to publicly disclose transparent reports on diversity and anti-discrimination policies. Violators would lose the right to bid for national projects. Naomi Carter was invited to testify before the committee. Dressed in a black suit, her voice resonated across the chamber. "The American economy is not built solely on steel, oil, or technology. It is built on trust, the belief that every worker has value. When that trust collapses, $2.5 billion disintegrate like sand." The chamber rose to its feet in applause. The story spread across every platform. The hashtag #Dignity has value became a global trend. Videos of Preston scrubbing toilets, Isabel working as a barista, Margaret folding shirts were juxtaposed with images of Naomi stepping out of Congress. People called it the before and after of justice. A black student tweeted, "All my life I was told I was nothing. Thank you, Naomi, for proving that nothing can become $62 billion. That post garnered over 5 million likes. CEOs from Tokyo, London, and Dubai were forced to restructure their public relations strategies. McKinsey released a report. 75% of young investors were willing to pull their money out of businesses, showing signs of discrimination. At a closed-door conference in Davos, tensions boiled. A European billionaire slammed the table. "The age of silent money is over. We now live in the age of money that speaks, and it will scream when we do wrong." Another interrupted, "No, it will scream when Naomi Carter decides to make it scream." But along with glory, Naomi also carried an immense burden. The press called her the Dignity CEO. Media hounded her. Students begged for interviews. Politicians invited her to collaborate. One late night, Naomi sat in her 72nd-floor glass office, gazing at the city below. She wrote in her journal, "They think I am a legend. But I am only the little girl who once sat by the window of a poor apartment, waiting for my grandmother to return from scrubbing floors. Everything I have done was only so I would not waste her sacrifice." She smiled faintly, but her eyes carried a shadow of worry. For Naomi understood. Once you become a symbol, every mistake, no matter how small, is magnified into catastrophe. A year later, at Harvard Business School, a professor of strategic management wrote on the board, "Case study, the Whitmore collapse." He looked at his students. "Learn this lesson. A $5 billion deal collapsed, not because of markets, not because of technology, but because of one insult. In the 21st century, character equals capital." A young woman stood and asked, "But what if we are expecting too much from Naomi as a symbol? Will justice truly endure when she is not there?" The class fell silent. The question lingered in the air like a prophecy. The future would test whether the seeds Naomi planted could grow into a lasting movement, or if it was only a brief blaze of brilliance. Across the world, Whitmore became the very definition of self, destruction through arrogance, while Naomi Carter stood as a living symbol that dignity carries economic value. Yet, even in the height of triumph, Naomi knew the real battle had only just begun. She asked herself, "What will happen when I am no longer here to remind them? Who will rise when justice is once again dismissed?" That question was not only for her, but for all of humanity. After the global earthquake, Naomi Carter thought the final chapter had closed. But old powers never die quietly. In the shadows, corporations that had lost their influence began to align. A conservative senator called Naomi a threat to traditional business. A banking CEO whispered in a closed-door meeting, "If she continues, any one of us could be destroyed by a single word." They launched a smear campaign. Tabloids published headlines calling Naomi a dictator, a vengeful tyrant. Talk shows mocked her, sneering, $62 billion, and an ego the size of America. They hired lawyers to countersue, accusing Naomi of reckless interference with the market. But when the case reached court, Naomi did not flinch. In a courtroom packed with reporters, she stood tall and pointed at the clause in the contract. Clause 14.2, right to terminate for cause. Termination for unethical behavior is lawful. You signed this clause yourselves. Her voice cut like steel. The room held its breath. The judge's gavel struck. Case dismissed. The crowd erupted in applause. When legal warfare failed, her opponents turned to personal attacks. Hackers breached data. Fake news flooded the internet. But the more they fought, the more Naomi proved her resolve. Instead of hiding, she stepped into the light, holding a press conference. You call me a dictator? No, I ask for only one simple rule. Respect human beings. If that frightens you, then you are the problem. Her words spread across social media, transformed into a slogan plastered on T-shirts, posters, and even graffiti walls. Respect is profit. As Naomi moved forward, the Whitmore family crumbled. Preston wandered through their former offices, staring at the tower where the family name was being torn down. He whispered, "All of this, because of one night." Margaret worked in a clothing store, still trying to hold her head high, yet every customer's glance reminded her that the past could not be erased. Blair struggled to rebuild her life, but every job application dragged back the viral video. Carter, once arrogant, now mopped the floors of a building funded by the Grandma Rose Fund. The very money that once belonged to his family's legacy, now sustaining the people he had once despised. The collapse of Whitmore was not merely a chapter in history, it was a living sentence, hanging over every powerful family. 3 years later, Naomi Carter was no longer just a CEO. She had become a global symbol of justice in business. The Grandma Rose Fund had financed more than 1,200 small businesses, creating 40,000 jobs. A new university was built in Chicago, named after Naomi's grandmother. The woman who once scrubbed floors to survive, now remembered as an unsung hero. At the inauguration, Naomi addressed thousands of students. Someone asked me, "What is your greatest victory?" It is not $62 billion. It is not the collapse of Whitmore. It is today, when I see young faces, knowing you will never have to kneel under an insult. You will stand tall, because you know your true worth is not in your wallet, but in the way we treat one another. The crowd fell silent, then exploded in thunderous applause. That night, alone in her office, Naomi gazed out at the blazing city. She thought of her journey, from a poor apartment to the summit of power. She thought of the battles fought, the enemies fallen. Yet in her heart, she still heard her grandmother's voice. "Hold on to your dignity, child. It is the only thing they cannot take from you." She closed her eyes and smiled softly. The world outside was still filled with injustice, but now millions had learned that dignity itself holds economic value. And that legacy would outlive any corporation, outlive even the name Naomi Carter. The Whitmore dynasty had fallen, but from its ashes, a new standard was born. Character equals capital. In business schools, in trade agreements, in every international negotiation, people would recall a snowy night in Chicago, when a woman who was called nothing proved to the world the true value of one word: dignity. And from that moment, every CEO, every politician, every person understood. To belittle one human being could cost you an entire empire. In business, people often talk about money and power. But this story proves that character is the true capital. A $2.5 billion deal can disappear with a single phone call, while respect has the power to transform an entire industry. If you believe that respect must come before profit, hit like, subscribe to follow more stories, and leave a comment with the phrase, respect.